Wooshkindein da.a yochat duasak, yes nachatsiti, dakdein tan ayachat. As Alyssa said, I am Tlingit from the Raven moiety, dakdein tan. My mother's line comes out of Huna, Alaska, Glacier Bay up there. And my Tlingit name is Wooshkindein da.a, which loosely translates to walking along a path together, one behind another. Some say that it's follow the leader, but I don't know that there's a leader in this realm. We're just walking together in an upward trajectory. Pretty appropriate for somebody who's kind of holding space for many other weavers to come along and join in on this adventure. Goodness Chish for being here. Thanks for bearing witness to this show and this presentation today. My mother, Clarissa Rizal, was one of the few pictured in this little picture behind me in 1985. She was a community leader, a revolutionary artist, didn't get as much recognition as she could have. She was just on the edge of social media explosion, didn't quite have Instagram, but she was also an enthuser of others. And what is her name? Aldona Joanitis called her a polymath, which means that she had her hands in many different things and was, I don't know how she did it, but she was like excellent at all of them: collage, painting, weaving, teaching, all the things. So Clarissa Rizal, a pretty amazing person. She also asserted something early on in my life that we are missing our collective families. The way that Tlingit Haida, Tsimshian, and indigenous peoples now, not in America maybe, and maybe some down south natives still live collectively with multiple generations. My Filipino heritage also still lives this way in places in the world, where we live with our partners and our children, but then our aunties and our grandmas, and we still take care of our grandparents, and they live with us, and we have multiple generations and side generations of cousins and everyone living in close proximity to each other. My mother was big on saying that the detriment of our people is largely due to the absence of that community, that family community, and the interconnectedness of how we used to live, how we used to be, and that when and if we can come back to that, even just a little bit, that we can pull our families back together, that we can be together working on collective projects, we are strengthening ourselves, we are strengthening our families, we're strengthening our communities, but we are ourselves stronger for that connection. So that's the foundation of this particular talk, is coming back to that and how we find that, and are we gonna make it? Coming around to that. Yeah, we're better off together, right? So Clarissa taught me to weave when I was 15. I didn't really love it. I was a teenager and raging hormones in your teen years, and I was like, let me go do my thing and play down at the river and let me hang with my boys. And she was pretty insistent that I was gonna weave 4 rows or 6 rows of these little 10-inch leggings that I was working on. And she's like, you can't leave the house, Yes, I had to do the dishes and vacuum and weave these rows of weaving before I could leave the house. And thank goodness she did, because here I am today, knowing what my life's work is. But in 97, 98, I started spinning warp, and the warp is the stuff that hangs this way. If you can visualize the word warp in your mind, it has a long P. If you draw an arrow on that, right, the little P coming down with the arrow is warp. So when you're looking at a textile in this room, or any Northwest Coast textile, the warp is the stuff that hangs this way. And even on the loom, the warp is the stuff that's hanging down here. She taught me to spin warp in my teen years, and in 97, 98, I spun 1,000 yards of warp for a weaver colleague friend of my mother's, Evelyn Vanderhoop. Come to find out just a few years ago that Evelyn was pointing at one of her robes, she's still alive, and she said, oh, this is the warp that Clarissa spun for me in 1997. And I said, no, I spun that warp. And she's like, you spun this warp? So fun to make these interwoven connections that, in my teenage years, I was weaving for this renowned Haida weaver, Evelyn Vanderhoop. Super amazing. She's still, I will still message her and be like, is this correct? Or how do you do this? So it's Thankfully, Evelyn is still here for me to call on when that's a thing. Again, strength in our community of still being able to reach out and connect with our other artists who are still living and still practicing daily. So I've been a full-time artist for almost 14 years. People are like, how do you pull that off, right? I do teach career development for the artist with the university here in Juneau, but half of my income is actually from teaching art or teaching how to be an artist or teaching little pieces of that, teaching and or collaborating. And another other portion, 40% of my income comes from actually making and selling art. So in all of this, community is the center of my work. Which was also true when I was an actor at Perseverance Theater, when I was an actor in my teenage years, that collaborative making is my happy place. People have asked me multiple times, like, what is it about Chilkat weaving or Raven's tail weaving that you love the most? Is it that you like the fiber and you like taking the plant and the animal and spinning them together and you like you like the colors that pop and you like the way the curves come alive and you can shape ovoids and yeah, all that stuff's great. It's great. I do like that stuff. But it's the human connection and the community and the weaving of relationships and story and beingness, the being together, that keeps me coming back. That community is what keeps me here, which is also why I couldn't ever imagine living somewhere other than Juneau. Right? We're really good at that in Juneau, that, somebody's on the side of the road, we're gonna pull over and help them check what's going on. And oh my gosh, they're out of Skittles. I happen to have Skittles, I'm gonna give them some, right? That community is my happy place. It's really, I have to come back to it and come back to it. It also leaks into the work that I create solo when I'm sitting solo sitting on the beach with my children. On the heels of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, I wove a Black Lives Matter armband in response to that community, which is, being a person of color, we are all affected by how everyone else is affected. So my good girlfriend, Allison Bremner, you're amazing. She did a series of power fists and printed them on a t-shirt. And I said, hey, can I adapt that power fist that you made in all the different colors? Can I adapt that one to be a 3-fingered hand with a thumb? Because in Chilkat weaving, ask me again about 5-fingered hands in Chilkat weaving. But I said, hey, I want to do one that's 3 fingers and a thumb and weave it and put it on this armband. And this armband is intended, it's bright, bright yellow. You'll see a picture of it shortly. It's intended to be worn whenever a person of color leaves their home. And hopefully someday it'll be mass produced and every person can wear them when they leave the house to notify any other person of color that they are standing by to make a phone call, to film, to document, to speak and call out if there is a need for support. So that's the Black Lives Matter Allies armband. And then as COVID hit, someone said, well, there's this mask thing happening, are you gonna make a mask? And I was like, I don't weave masks, I weave ceremonial regalia. So I wove a Chilkat protector mask, and it's like the bottom half of our iconic Chilkat faces here, just from the nose to the mouth. Very, very cute. And animated in a way. And when I wove the first one, my 11-year-old son was like, oh, Mom, you should weave 40 of those. And I was like, you're crazy. These things take 70 hours to weave. Yeah, that's wild. He's like, yeah, but you're documenting history, Mom. And I was like, oh, yeah. History. So that got me in the fearless mode to message multiple museums and be like, hey, do you want to help document history during the coronavirus pandemic? And turned out that I didn't weave 40 masks. I wove 37 over 2.5 years of the pandemic. That's insane. I don't want to do the math. You guys can do the math of what 37 times 70 is, but I'm in many, many, many different museum collections now, that was dream life of an artist. Like, how many lines can you put on your resume? I don't know. That was ego driven, but it's also helping secure grants, which furthers the community work right? So many of my grants are community focused since that point. And not only was it weave these Chilkat protector masks, but it was an opportunity to share, again, through our community, to teach other people how to weave these masks, right? To let that go into other communities. And the way to do that, of course, because we were still masked and not traveling, I didn't get on a plane for years, I opened the teachings online, because I used to teach a dozen classes a year. I opened up online and had almost 60 students weave these masks with me through various support systems. We had Bunnell Street Arts support one, Tlingit Haida Central Council supported a class. Again, we found ourselves in this like fully isolated pandemic where we're like Zooming, our children are like Zooming next to us to school and our partners are working from home and it's crazy and we want to like rip our hair out and like go dig a little hole so that we can have some quiet. But every Sunday afternoon, I would Zoom in with my students. And there again was my happy place in this interconnected community that was not just my solo zip code, but reaching to Maryland, reaching to Nebraska, reaching to Colorado, up into the Yukon Territory. And that community brought us all strength through the pandemic. Not gonna get emotional. That many of my students were like, this is what sustains me and lets me do all of this hard, isolated, quiet, lonely work through the pandemic, because on Sundays we get to come together and laugh and share meatloaf recipes and lament our dogs dying during the pandemic, and we can't do anything with other people to acknowledge that like life sucks, death sucks. Life's really hard with children and without children and divorce and new marriages, and how do we celebrate when we're so isolated? So, finding our strength in community. Which brought me to, I think, the end of 2020. Maybe I'm reversing back here, but somewhere in all of that teaching of these masks and all of that, the City and Borough of Juneau did an Artworks grant. Thank you for that. They put out a call and said, hey, we want to drop some money to support the making of art in response to the pandemic. I proposed a series of these masks in transgender pride flag colors, in the LGBTQ rainbow pride colors, and in a pattern that is like 300 years old called All Our Ancestors. So I called that triptych of masks Ancestral Indigenous Protectors, because it was a Chilkat protector mask, speaking to how if we go back into when we were living in community and when we held up our unique individuals in our communities, the people who identified non-binary or LGBTQ or something other, right? All of our others were actually important to us and had a space to like hold story and tell story and share critical information for our peoples. So I said, hey, all our ancestors acknowledge this. We've got a vibrant queer community in Juneau and beyond, and it's time to come back and acknowledge that all of our community members deserve protection, deserve to have a voice, for all of us to take care of each other again. So again, coming back to that strength in community, in acknowledgement, in supporting each other in that. Whew, got ahead of myself. But it's all right, I've got notes, right? I guess it was also during the pandemic that I applied for the Native Arts and Cultures Foundation grant that started, I titled it, Protecting the Material Sovereignty of Our Indigenous Homelands, with the intent to explore mountain goat harvesting, like how to get mountain goat hair, the resource of yellow cedar and how our cedar trees are freezing to death because of the low undergrowth thank you, climate change. And they granted me this grant. It's a 2-year grant, collaboration with Goldbelt Heritage Foundation. So we've gone into the woods with our good friend Richard Carstensen, and we've interviewed multiple hunters and gone down to the Department of Fish and Game and figured out that we Tlingit Haida Tsimshian weavers, we're not necessarily killing goats to make our ceremonial regalia. Because here's one. One, did we have guns when we could shoot these goats? If we had guns and shot the goats off of the cliffs, who was climbing down to get the dead bodies and then dragging them back to the village? And why would we kill a goat, or 7 as we need to make full-size ceremonial regalia? Why would we kill 7 goats if that goat, or those 7 goats, would shed 2, 3, 4 pounds of fur every spring by brushing up against the bushes, right? So why would we go out of our way to kill the goat that lays the golden hair every spring, right? And we're like, not only would we need a whole slew of hunters, because the success of hunting a goat even today with guns and awesome bows and arrows, it's only like 50 to 70%. So, and you need an extra person to go up the hillside because you legally have to carry the mountain goat meat down the hillside. So who's gonna carry the wet, rain-soaked hide down the mountain so that you can ferment it and pull the hair off and all of this, right? That sounds like ridiculous work, and how many people are gonna be involved just to get the goat off the mountain, right? Not to mention, once it's down here, who's gonna ferment it, let it sit for a week, you know, start unraveling all the things, and then pull all of the guard hairs out, card it, comb it, process it, and then start spinning it with the yellow cedar bark. Coming back to our, why were we living together? Why was Auntie cooking the food and Grandma taking care of the laundry and the weaver was weaving? So there were probably easily 20 other people who were participating in the foundational prep work of weaving ceremonial regalia. We relied on our entire community to help bring our stories, bring our history to life. There wasn't a single, if it takes us 2,000 hours to make a single full-size ceremonial Chilkat dancing blanket, how could we spend another 600, 1,000 hours hunting, processing, cleaning, you know, spinning the warps for these woven documents? We couldn't do it alone. We still can't do it alone. Now we have the joy of being able to get online and click a button and be like, hey, Australia, New Zealand, send us some of that merino wool. Click, beep, send, right? Oh, thank you, PayPal. We still have this community that we're reaching into to bring strength to our communities, that most of the robes in this exhibit are made of merino wool and yellow cedar, because that saved us 500 hours and 20 persons to process all of that stuff for us. And who knows, over there down under, how many people are processing the merino wool that we need to create our work. So pretty amazing interwoven communities, even thousands and thousands of miles away. As we go into the other part of the fiber that creates the warps for our ceremonial regalia, the yellow cedar that we need, that was the other part, or the other half of my Native Arts and Cultures Foundation grant, protecting the material sovereignty of our indigenous homelands. Thank you, NACF. The trees, cedar trees around Southeast Alaska, are no longer having that strong undergrowth of foliage that is insulating their roots through the winter. So we have multiple cedar stands of just an arm's reach, you know, a jump away from us, that are freezing to death. Like their roots are freezing in the winter, and we are losing our cedar trees. So what does that mean for being a Native artist, being an artist in this tradition that the core of our work is that yellow cedar bark that offers the firm structure so we can create ovoids, so we can weave circles, and our work isn't going to collapse in on itself. What does that mean for us if our yellow cedar trees die? It makes me think about meeting up with the Japanese Ainu. You guys know the Ainu from northern Japan. They do some really beautiful hand-stitched textiles that we did a parallel show back in 2010, actually called Parallel Worlds, the Japanese Ainu and the weavings of the Northwest Coast. But I ran into, I think, 7 or 8 Ainu from Japan. They were in Canada, and here we were hanging out together, and they had come down to witness us weaving some Chilkat and some cedar bark basketry. They were also doing some throat singing at the same event and all this, but they came over and started like grabbing our cedar, our yellow cedar, and they were like, what's this, what's this? And between like the 8 of them, they had one translator. So it was like all this enthusiasm, and like we could feel the rise as we were all like, what is this? And we were all excited. And they were like, whoa, 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 whoa. And the translator was like, what is this that you're working in? Because look at what we have. And one of the Ainu Japanese pulled out some bark from her little satchel and was like, do you do it like this? And she put the bark in her mouth and started twisting it so it looked like the twine that we use to twine on yellow cedar bark capes. And we were like, are you kidding me? And through the translator, we were like, wait, you're using the inner bark of a tree from northern Japan, and we're using the inner bark from the trees in Southeast Alaska, and we're creating artwork and bags and capes and hats and all this out of the inner bark of a tree. We're like, no way. So there's hope. If we run out of cedar, maybe we'll like, canoe over across the Pacific and be like, yo, our brethren on the Japanese side, you want to share with us this inner bark? Because similar structure, I don't know what the sap was. We didn't get to like whether we have to boil it to put it into our textiles or not, because that is a 3-day process to get the sap out to be able to spin it into our Chilkat blankets. But I was like, oh, I think we're gonna be okay. Just like 40 years ago, we were like, why should we spend 500 hours processing mountain goat if we can go click, beep, make a phone call, back then it was make a phone call to New Zealand and send some merino wool over. So we're like, if our yellow cedar trees do end up all freezing and falling over, I think we're gonna be okay adapting to our world community and the strength we get from reaching out to our friends across the ocean to say, hey, we can keep recording our history here with this world community, yes? So we're gonna rewind a little bit and go back to this workshop that's happening behind me in time and literally behind me. In 1985, my mother's teacher, Jenny Thanat, noted as the last master Chilkat weaver out of Klukwan, Alaska. She taught this class in 1985 to, I think it was 17 or 18 women outside of her family lineage. Up until this point, Chilkat weaving was very much like passed from daughter to, from mother to daughter or auntie to niece, or stayed in the family line. Because there were not many students learning from Jenny that were in her family lineage, she opened this up with, I don't remember who was actually the funder for this, but they ended up at the Raven House in Haines, Klukwan, Alaska. And these women stayed for 2 weeks and wove with Jenny. And Jenny would wake up at like 2, 3 in the morning and go to each loom and fix the mistakes, She'd be like, shh, don't tell anybody. But she was like going through the space. And there are multiple speeches that she gave during that workshop that are recorded with Sealaska Heritage Institute. You can search their archives, Jenny Thanat, make sure you spell her name correctly. And she speaks about the hope that she felt, knowing that the work was not going to die with her. She spoke about the sisterhood that she felt, being in community with these women who were learning from her, who were hungry to carry on this work. The strength that she felt in knowing that she could step away into the spirit realm, and the work would continue without her. Are we coming back to strength and community, that she was like giving this work beyond her family lines and realizing that things were going to be okay? So we go forward a year from that in 1986. I think it was March or April, and my mother spent 6 weeks with Jenny Clenot working on a pair of dance leggings. Jenny wove one, and my mother, Clarissa, wove the other. And hilariously, they have been hanging in this museum, the Juneau-Douglas City Museum, for like almost 4 years. They're over across the way if you want to check them out on your way out. My mother spun the warp for them. And when they hung them, she had to spin the warp for her own project and then for Jenny's project. And when they were done, there was this much warp left from like hanging the warps on the loom. And Jenny like nudged her and said, "You see, this is exactly how it's supposed to be." Like, my mom didn't know how many exact yards she needed, but she spun that, and that was all that was left. So there's like a little notebook in all of my mom's stuff in the legacy that she left me. There's like 40 notebooks, and one of them has a little piece of warp and a little arrow pointing and saying, "See, Jenny said this is exactly how it's supposed to be." So my mom was distinguished in her lifetime that she was one of the last living apprentices of Jenny's who started a project or wove a project with Jenny from start to finish and got all the little like nuances of not just the weaving techniques, but the spiritual aspects of what it's like to be a Chilkat weaver, that we take care of our children, that we attend to our partners. You know, make sure that they're happy, that we keep our houses clean, that we're keep a balance in our life, that we're not obsessing over our weaving and neglecting the other parts of our life. Because you know what? Chilkat weaving can become the other man or the other woman or the child that takes more attention away from your human children. And if that happens, when that happens, because it has happened in my lifetime, in my life, in my work as a weaver, when that happens, there is a deep resentment that is created from your family, from your people that love you the most. And they're like, "Hey, why are you doing that thing over there? We don't like this that you're doing because you're not paying attention to us anymore. You don't like us anymore. You like that more than us." So that's where the balance comes in. And again, reaching back into, we have to remember that our community is what's keeping us strong to come to the work and be able to continue creating ceremonial beings that come into the world and dance and have their own lives. So sure enough, Clarissa did this apprenticeship, and 6 weeks later, a month later, Jenny Clenot dies. So my mom's like, what now what? Now what do I do? Where's my teacher? What do I do with this? And shortly thereafter, we moved away from Juneau for a couple of years. My mom was like done with the rain. She had lived here her entire life. She was like, "Please get me out of this 300 days of gray." So we moved to the Southwest. My little sister was born. You can follow her on Instagram, Kadusne, Ursula Hudson. You're welcome. Thank you. She's also a weaver, new at the work recently. And we spent a couple years in the Southwest, in the beautiful sunlight, the lighting, the sunrises and sunsets of New Mexico. That's where my sister was born. And that whole time, my mother did not weave. She was happy doing other things. She attended the Institute of American Indian Arts. She was happy in her, being able to go deep into raising a baby and not working and raising and working and raising and working. My dad insisted that we come back to Alaska. Love him a lot, but oh my God, please don't make us go back to gray. So we came back to Juneau, begrudgingly, moved us back to Juneau, and my mother went into a deep depression. She was the lowest that she had been in a very long time. Oh my goodness, how am I going to survive this? She's out in the rain, midnight, and she's yelling up at the heavens saying, "How am I going to live in this again?" And she had a connection to her higher self, my mother did. And she says, or she said, or she writes about how the heavens would open or the rain would stop, and she got this voice, Chilkat weaving is the answer. It's like, oh yeah, that's BS, right? I haven't woven since my teacher died. That's a whole bunch of, what is the actual answer? How am I gonna survive living in Alaska again? Chilkat weaving. Okay, give me the actual answer. Chilkat weaving, boom, 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 right? She's like, oh, fine. She goes to sleep. 8 o'clock, the phone rings, back when we only had phones that were attached to the wall. The phone rings, and it is Jenny's daughter calling and saying, hey, I know my mom's been dead a while, but she received National Endowment for the Arts funding. She got a grant right before she passed, and we put it into a trust on her deathbed for her grandchildren to learn how to Chilkat weave. And you, Clarissa, are the one who has the most knowledge of Jenny's lineage. Are you willing to have 3 of her students come and learn to weave from you? And my mother's like on the phone, bawling her eyes out. Like, what is this? Like, all the way back around, here's the descendants of Jenny Clenot coming back to save my mother, to bring grace to her being able to tolerate 300 days of gray. So she did. She taught Jenny's grandchildren to weave. She taught many other people to weave. She held workshop after workshop. There's proposals that she gave to like Goldbelt and Sealaska and all these different institutions. She was making like $20 and $25 an hour to share this knowledge in like the early 90s. I'm like, that was not enough. Still not enough. But she was it. Right there for a while, it was her and Evelyn and Cheryl Samuel who were teaching this art form. So, through all of this, my mother has asked me, can you come and dye these balls with me? Dye this yarn, stir the dye pot, spin this stuff, split the cedar bark. Let's go harvest cedar bark with Dolores Churchill. You want to know what life looks like? Go harvest cedar bark with 86-year-old Dolores Churchill. Maybe she was 84, but we stayed at her place down in Ketchikan, got a grant to go do this. Oh my gosh, I think it was Alaska State Council on the Arts. Thank you very much. It was 2009. It was a long time ago. We're down there in Ketchikan. We stayed at her place. I had a little 17-month-old baby on me, so I'm carrying this baby in the little ergo baby carrier. But when we wake up, it's like 5:30 in the morning, I go downstairs, and there is Dolores, and she's got those elastic band things. She's standing on one, and she's like going like this with her arms. And I was like, Dolores, what are you doing? And she's like, I'm preparing to pull cedar bark. Here. And she hands me the green elastic band, and I was like, I don't need an elastic band. I'm like 27, 29, I don't need this. We went hiking up this hillside, right, and we're pulling bark all afternoon, right? We're driving up this bumpy road, get up into the cedar stands, we start pulling bark, and at one point, I was holding some bark and swinging out on this tree to get this to come off, right? So I'm using all of my every muscle that I don't use. You know, I carry babies, but whatever. The next morning, we woke up to go harvest again, and I couldn't lift my arms. You guys, when the 80-something-year-old elder, seasoned cedar weaver says, hey, here's some elastic bands, do some workout before we go, you listen, okay? Because that strength that you need, yeah, she's smart. So I did try really hard to use those elastic bands the second day, and I was like crying through the door, so I'm so sorry. She's like, she didn't say, I told you so, she just gave me a look. You know that look grandma gives you? Holy. So yes, my kid, there are photos somewhere in the ether realms of my little toddler sitting on the thing, watching me pull bark off of trees. Epic adventure. If you get the chance to pull cedar off of trees, do that thing. But on that note, don't ever pull more than your hang loose distance, right? No wider than this on a yellow cedar tree, and make sure that it's a tree bigger than you can hug, right? If your fingers can touch around the trunk of the tree, it's not big enough for you to pull a width of bark off of, okay? Don't do it. And if there is a wound on a tree already, like you can see like the graying of the inner bark of the tree, do not pull another strip off of that tree because it has already hit its maximum, yeah? So, coming back to cedar, we may traverse the ocean to get bark, right? And right now, we still have connections to Dolores and Holly Churchill, who is daughter to Dolores, who teaches a lot of yellow cedar and red cedar classes. She randomly sends me boxes of scraps, like the pieces that are too short for them to actually weave anything with. I'm like, what is this? And I'm like, Holly Churchill sending me money. She's sending me money, like scraps of yellow cedar. That is so expensive. I won't tell you how expensive it is. It's more expensive than some things that are legalized in the state of Alaska right now. So by the ounce, it is very expensive. But that has been really good that we've been making connections, again, across zip codes, across communities, across families to have yellow cedar sent to us. So there's hope yet for that. I may or may not be stockpiling yellow cedar because I don't know how long we're going to have it. And anytime somebody's like, hey, I got this yellow cedar, it's been sitting in my such and such for a couple of years, I'm like, I'm going to squirrel that away. So that's a thing. If you know somebody who has rounds of cedar or scraps of cedar, you know where to find me, down on Seward Street or lilyhopeweaver@gmail.com. Okay. And that's where we are now. On that whole, like coming, let's see how many times we can come around into this circle that we've got. Because of the pandemic, I had to move all of my teaching online, right? We wove Chilkat protector masks. We wove a few little like pendants with little circles in them. We wove all sorts of projects in the last couple of years because I used to teach a dozen classes a year, and then I started Zooming every Sunday, but I started putting my instructions on little videos on YouTube, unlisted, and had people sign up on Patreon to follow me, and every Sunday we'd weave together. And I'd say we'd weave together, meaning they would bring whatever project they're working on and ask me questions wherever they were stuck on the video tutorials. I wasn't trying to teach during that whole 3-hour Zoom. It was more like come together, weave where you are, literally and geographically. So that was amazing, yes, to have that strength of being together. And then in October of 2021, this cohort had been with me for about 1.5 years, and they said, can we start weaving something bigger than these little masks and these little pendants and these little like 10-inch projects? And we started weaving small-sized Chilkat dancing blankets. Here's the fun part, though. Through all of the merino wool and yellow cedar and access to materials through all of this, we don't have spinners. The people who take the fiber and the bark, and like the wool and bark together and spin it on our leg, it's like hundreds of hours of work to spin the warp needed for even a small size Chilkat dancing blanket. So here we were going, I had to teach all of my students how to spin their own warp. And some of them have full-time jobs at 50 hours a week, and some of them were like, I don't think I'm gonna be able to spin. One of my students was like, I'm not gonna pull scarce resources from the Southeast Alaska. I'm gonna weave my robe on hemp, which was like really profound to think like, oh, that is an option, right? That we can, what story is that telling that we can weave ceremonial regalia on new materials, right? But through all of this, there were, I think, 32 of us who started blankets together. And I think 5, maybe 7 didn't spin their own warp. They actually paid another one of the students or another artist to spin the warp for them. And I think it was February, March of 22 that we started hanging the warp, right? The warp that hangs this way. And then we started finger twining the first rows across our robes. So from March until, I can't even remember what it was, January of this year, so January 23, we were weaving and weaving and weaving and weaving and losing a lot of sleep and weaving while we're in Zooms for other work and weaving off camera because we were cramming the hours in. We figured out that the fastest weaver spent 307 hours working on her piece, and the not so fast weavers were spending 500 and 600 hours weaving our small sized Chilkat dancing robes. It's a lot of hours in a very short window of time when we're also working 40-hour-a-week jobs and taking care of our families and attending to our partners and cleaning our houses. But that Sunday, the Sunday kept us coming back, and the smiles and laughter and tears and the sharing and the community that we were collaborating across miles. So we all gathered together in Juneau for 2 weeks. It was like 13 days, I think, but landed somewhere in the 20th of January, and we were together until the 3rd of February. And on February 3rd, we opened this show at the Juneau-Douglas City Museum. And the photo behind us is probably the largest gathering of the largest Chilkat weavings since even before 1985, where they were working on smaller projects. So I don't think we knew what we were doing while we were doing it. I mean, we were like, let's keep weaving, let's keep, just keep swimming, And then we had Josh Jackson and his K1 Tlingit language culture, TCLL, Tlingit Culture, Language, and Literacy kindergarten, first grade class come down to the Walter Soboleff building in the Shukahit clan house, and they waited a whole hour. These students were so patient. They waited an entire hour for us to continue speaking about all the things. We're talking, speaking a lot of Tlingit, which is good that they do. They know Tlingit language. But finally, we draped these little kid robes over their shoulders, and all of us weavers got to witness our little Chilkat dancing robes come to life and take their first steps all together at the same time. I think we all cried. Like, we all cried. And then we had Sydney come out and take photographs. And I still burst into tears sometimes about the community that we have built far beyond our southeast, but beyond Juneau, beyond our southeast borders, that many of these weavers came home for the first time in their lineage, right? That their grandmother was born here. They came home to be with us and learn this art form that was, their great-grandmother's work. And how many of us not just survived the pandemic, not just survived life and death and, the roller coaster that is life, of all the things and broken tires and, shattered windows and children breaking legs and all the epic fails and joys of life, that we all came together on the regular and continue to do so every Sunday or every other Sunday now, that we have really found and created and continue to bring strength to our communities. And I'll leave you right there if you have questions. Thanks for being here. Ask me all the things. Yeah. Oh, we might hand you a mic though, if you're okay being on camera, sure. or at least on audio. Mm-hmm.
Hey, I have two questions. One is, I've always been curious about the circles, and I was told there's a very limited number of cultures that adapt the circles in weaving, and Maori are one. And so I was wondering if you had more detail about making circles and weaving.
Okay.
And then just a general artist question. You know, you're navigating between a very traditional style and incorporating modern life, and how do you find your line of staying true to tradition and having it be a living, dynamic art too?
Thanks for asking. First question, circles. There's a very few of us that weave circles, few of us being artists in the textile world. As far as I know, Chilkat weaving, which is practiced by Tlingit Haida, Simshian, Nishka, Kwakwakiwak, Kwakutl, like there's Canadian First Nations that also practice the Chilkat technique, or Nachain, or Gwishalit, or Nahin in our three Tlingit Haida Simshian languages. As far as I know, this circle, the way that it's viewed in Chilkat weaving is, this particular circle is the only one I know of that is kind of perfectly round, but it's deceptive because it's created with braids. That if you go to the Navajo tradition, there are some that look circular, but it's like pixelated, right? There's the little step that happens when this circle is dropping down. I did get a note that someone saw a Navajo weaving with the braids added around or in the actual textile itself, and they said, "Hey, did you do a cultural exchange with some Navajo weavers, because there's braids around these circles and I've never seen that before." Turns out my mom did a couple. She did a couple exchanges with some Navajo weavers down in Shiprock country. And who knows? The artist went back to collect that robe after she and I talked, and that weaving had already been acquired, so it was no longer in the shop. So dang it, I didn't get to see it in real life. But I think, I can't speak to the Maori weavers. I think that they also do a circular thing, but I don't know if the braiding technique is the same or similar to make the circle like really, like you could lay a dime or a quarter on it and it really like outlines that shape. Could still be pixelated, but if y'all know the answer to that, I'd love to know. Then I could answer the next one correctly. And to answer the question about how do I stay true to tradition and still innovate or step into where we are now or move into, existing as a modern artist? People ask me, like, why do you continue to weave ceremonial regalia with only blue, green, and yellow and black and white, right? It was how it was taught to me, that we barely ever use red, and that we use a very sparing use of red. You can look through this space and there's only a couple pops of red, usually in the tongue of the wolf, right? And then behind you over here, Ricky's one with the wolf mouth in red. I did weave a robe once upon a time for the Portland Art Museum, and I had put a little red tongue in for the raven, like a raven's tongue. And I was really excited about it. I wove both red tongues, and I was like, ooh, that was the best 6 hours that I've ever woven, da, da, da. And I went away and slept, and the next morning I came in, and the central face of my weaving was no longer the focal point. All I could see was red. So I took out 6 hours of work, and I re-wove those tongues in blue, and when you go to the Portland Art Museum, you'll see the robe has no red in it. And it's true that when you're, like, no matter what you're looking at, right, if you're in the sea of colors, like when you're looking at humans out and about in the world, the person wearing red is going to stand out. Like there's a stereotype about the woman wearing red at a wedding, right? So there's a pop that's different than any other color in the rainbow. The other part of that, what my teacher, Clarissa's teacher, Jenny, said is, or maybe it was Clarissa interpreting, don't know, but we use a sparing bit of red in our work because red is indicative of ego. And Chilkat weaving doesn't, there's no place for our ego in the Chilkat work. That it is a gift enough to weave, right? There isn't a, same to the five-fingered hand. Remember I said I would share that with you? The five-fingered hand is, when we go back in time, where do you see the handprint? 1,000, 2,000, how many thousands of years ago? We see cave paintings with the antelope, with the buffalo, and we see the handprint in whatever that pigment is on the cave wall. What is that symbology? That is, I was here, human was here, I'm making my mark here. That it's not enough that we paint the buffalo on the wall, that we have to stamp our hand to say we were existing in this space. Weaving a 5-fingered hand into a Chilkat weaving is that, I was here, I did this thing, see how amazing I am? And that's unnecessary. We can Berenstain Bears that hand, right? We can put those little hands in to say, I'm grateful that this work is in my life and that there's no goat or bear or raccoon or mouse that is weaving like this. The fact that it has been finger twined from the pulling of the bark to the processing of the wool to the first twine across and the last spiral of fur at the top, that is enough of a gift, and we don't need our extra handprint in there to say, look at this awesome thing I did. On the color thing though, that I won't weave purple or orange into a work, except unless I'm weaving like pride, like a pride mask in the rainbow colors, which you can also see in Deborah O'Gara's work over here. She put the rainbow mask through the face. I tell my students, and I practice this myself, that I have to be really intentional if I'm going to break color tradition, to know why I'm doing it and to be able to justify or explain why. Why is that face purple? Why is that face rainbow? Why am I deviating from these colors? The Chilkat dancing blanket is a ceremonial being, not only recording history for our peoples, but it comes through with an essence of its own, that sometimes when we're sitting at a new work, we'll cry through the construction of most of it. And like, why all this sadness? And it's whatever this being is, it's bringing grief through the work, right? Sometimes we'll go to it and we'll just be like so bubbly and just energetic the whole time. We're like, oh, I can't wait to go back to my weaving, it's just my happy place. And then you go to the other one and you're like, I don't want to do this anymore. But you have to keep working on it. It's like it pulls you back to it, right? These spiritual beings come in yellow and blue and green and white, right? When my mom died, I had this question come up and I was like, why the blue and yellow and white? Why? And I started listening to this book about crossing over into the spirit realm and what happens to us when we die, and we think about these as little spirit beings and all this. And that convergence of knowledge and like asking those questions, I want to say it was The Journey of Souls. And whoever the author was said that our spirits, once we have left our human form, our spirits vibrate in 3 colors: white, yellow, and blue. And when we're in that spirit realm, those spirits can see in our world in white and yellow and blue. So as long as I'm weaving traditional ceremonial regalia, I'm going to stick to those colors that my spirit and our spirits can collectively communicate. And if I'm going to step into some modern work, maybe I'll deviate and weave some orange or some purple. But I might save that for the Northwest Coast geometric weaving of Raven's Tail and let that be where my inspiration is expanded into, what is that creative expression? So you'll have to come back in summer of 2024 and see all of our Raven's Tail expressions here in the Juneau-Douglas City Museum.
Could you talk a little bit about the designs on each of these? How did the weavers decide what kind of design they would put on their rope?
Sure. Okay, the designs. We were conscious on most of these pieces to not weave clan crests because we weren't sure the final home for some of these works. We were inspired by Clarissa's piece that she wove for my son Louis, my second-born son. And Louis was tiny when my mother finished this one in the glass case. And it's her version of his beingness. So if you look at the main central face, there are little dimples on either side of the mouth and these really distinctive eyebrows with the little lines coming up towards the center. Turns out she drew the eyebrows of every one of her grandchildren in one of her notebooks and intended to weave a child-sized Chilkat weaving for each one of them, and passed away before she could do it. So my sister and I are like, all right, are you weaving the ones for my kids and I'm weaving the ones for your kids? And she's like, that's not a good deal. You have 5 kids and I only have 2. But that's where these robes came from, is that we were like, well, can we take this last weaving of Clarissa's and be inspired by that? So we did. And my sister, Ursula Hudson, Kadus Ne on Instagram, she digitized this. She was a graphic designer for like 17 years, so she is seasoned in vectorizing, and she created a little transparency, kind of like the one you see on this loom, but of course it looked like that pattern. We collaborated together and decided to turn one of the elements and then put in a little hand. The little fingers are really challenging to weave. So as you look around the room, there are some that have the little hand upright, and that little shape on the left and right bottom corner is the bottom left and right corner turned 90 degrees, right? So that happened. And I wove over 600 tutorial videos for my students as they wove in whatever zip code they were in. And most of us started with that central face with our little elements in the top left and right corner, and then the profile faces facing inward. And as we got closer and closer to the finish of this, we realized that some of us were going to finish and some of us were not going to. So we got really creative in the final, we call them feathers in the bottom underneath those upside down eyes. There's little feathers you can see in this green and blue one. There's a little set of blues and a green and another set of blues. Those are the feathers that were drawn, like woven by Clarissa. And then you can see some of us dropped in some buttons and made a really fast blue across, or this beautiful split U on Catherine's robe on the far right. Or this one back here with the zigzag pattern, that is returning salmon. And this is Karen's work where she said, you know what? It's gonna be my fisherman family, right? This is my husband teaching his grandchildren to fish, and they're out on the water with the returning salmon. So each of our robes kind of morphed into this new beingness. Some of the robes, like the black and white one back here by my sister Ursula, is actually woven on commission for the Smithsonian Renwick. So she was deviating from our pattern the whole time. She and I FaceTimed so many times, and she's like, I'm putting in 5 braids right here, is this correct? I'm like, that's all you can do. Like, that's the only, anyway. So much collaborative stuff, and she's like, what about these teeth? Am I supposed to drop a black braid in? And it worked out perfectly that she didn't drop any vertical black braids in the teeth. But yes, many of the robes in here were inspired by Clarissa's work, and any of them that don't have that central face and the profile faces were designed by the artists themselves or inspired by other historic pieces. Ricky Tagaban's robe was woven years ago for his family. He calls it Enza's robe because Dusjani and Roz Cruz have a baby that is related through family lineage, and he wove the wolf robe for their child. So yes, thanks for asking about that. We were really careful not to step on any cultural toes. If someone comes to us and says, hey, can you weave me a Chilkat blanket? The first conversation we have is this for your clan? Is this for art collection? Is this for a museum? And we stay away from replicating clan property or weaving an alternate member's clan. Like, I cannot just weave the Kiksadi clan robe without permission and from that particular clan. So these are generic, but not generic. They are inspired by the master, you could say.
Hi, I have a couple questions. Also, my name's Jazz, and I'm with News of the North with KINY Radio. And my first question is, what is the intention of how some of the colors come down underneath the main design, and then some of them don't have that? As well as most of them have the fur up top, but there's a couple that don't have the fur.
Excellent. The fringe that comes down in color is the individual artist's creative expression. So you would have to ask the artist what that means of the different colors of fringe. We call that overlay fringe. Some of the robes also have what's called fringe twining. Actually, you can see it best in Clarissa's robe back here in the case, that there's like a yellow and a blue line going through. When you look at historic Chilkat robes in museum collections and in private collection, they will have those two rows of weaving happening underneath the overlay fringe, which keeps the dance fringe from tangling when you start swaying and dancing in these blankets. The overlay fringe adds volume. So they've got some gorgeous volume happening in varying colors. And again, that's creative expression for the artist. I think there's one or two historic robes that I've seen that has the color fringe coming over, the overlay fringe coming over. So yeah, you'd have to ask each of them. The next question is fur. A lot of these artists had time to put fur on the top of their blankets. And one of them, this one over here, might not have fur, not necessarily due to time, but how tight the first row was woven. Again, if you look at historic robes, some will have fur, which is one of the first things to deteriorate on an older robe, right? So if you look at a 200-year-old Chilkat robe, sometimes the fur is like falling apart in places. So maybe the artist who didn't put fur on hers is like thinking 200, 500 years from now. Maybe they're like me and we're teaching 20-something students to finish their stuff and didn't stay up until 3 in the morning to put fur on their robe.
Is it sea otter fur?
I think the majority of the ones in this show is beaver fur, because you have to be a quarter native to spiral sea otter fur on your robe. So we defaulted to beaver to not have any sort of question on who's allowed to do this stuff.
Okay, and then I had one more question. Could you share experience passing weaving down to your children?
Oof. Have I done that? No. Passing weaving down to my children is ever present. As I'm sure it was for my mother, without her actually saying, one of you is going to be a weaver. Haha, just kidding, it's both of you. I joke that I just kept showing up for my mother, like when she'd say, come do this thing, come do that thing. I must have found some sort of enjoyment in it other than just being in the company of my mother, because again, I'm driven by community, right? I'm like, oh, I get to go teach this class with you. I get to go to Canada and do this thing. I get to what? I'm gonna stir these dye pots with 7 other people? Yeah, sign me up. But I have yet to involve my children intensely in the work. Like, my youngest is 5 and my eldest is 15 right now, as of it's 2023. So my 5 and 8 and 9-year-old girls are still, they wind balls with me. They like seeing what happens if you put yarn into cabbage and like all the, like, have you ever done the cabbage thing? I dare you to go home and cook up an entire head of cabbage, and then pour it into 3 different jars, the liquid, after you cook it, and you have to make sure that there's nothing, like the cabbage leaves are gonna be blank, no color in them. You have this beautiful purple color, pour it into 3 jars. In one of the jars, put baking soda, the orange box. In one of the jars, put apple cider vinegar, and then put a little bit of yarn into each one of those things. And I'm not gonna tell you which color does what, but it's very, very cool. Okay, so my kids really like that. They love the dyeing process. They love the winding of balls. My mom didn't force us into weaving until we were in our teenage years, and my 15-year-old Nicholas, he's made it really clear that he's like, I'll video document, I'll social media with you, I'll like help you write stuff, but I'm not going to be one of the weavers. Like, I will help you further this mission of making Chilkat weaving as visually recognizable as Navajo weavings somewhere in the world, as maybe it won't happen in my lifetime, but at some point, very soon, we will have people looking at these textiles saying, hey, that's a Chilkat weaving. Those are made in the northwest coast of Alaska and Canada. They're still being made. Yeah, that's the goal. But yes, I did name my middle child Eleanor. Her name is Eleanor Weaver Hope. So, if she doesn't end up a weaver, I'm gonna shake her by the shirt collars from the spirit realm and be like, girl, I'm coming for you.
We have time for one more question, and then we'll need to set up for the workshop. Is there anybody else who has a question?
I have just, I think a quick question. So, as artists and weavers, do you have the right or the technique to somehow sign each of your pieces for posterity? So, how does that work?
Yeah, how does that work? So we used to, some scholars would say that it is more reliable to look at the nose of the weaving itself so that you can track who might have woven that particular work. I would say that's pretty unreliable because I just wove 37 noses on all these Chilkat protector masks and not a single one of them looked like the other nose, even though I was using like a formula to do this. I have also woven 3 full-size Chilkat blankets and their noses don't look the same, so I don't know that that's reliable. But in the far left and right corners of many robes, let's see, which one is it? One of them has a signature on it. We call it the weaver's signature. It's on the one of Jenny, in this case behind you, and on Clarissa's robe up here in the far bottom left and right corner. On Clarissa's here, we have a wide band of yellow, a tiny line of white, and then a tiny line of yellow underneath. We call that the weaver's signature, but it's not reliable in that Clarissa had a method for her robes that the top line, or set of lines in yellow, was the count, like the number in sequence of which number robe that is. So this is her 10th of 11 robes, and there are 10 yellow lines there. Her 11th robe had 11 yellow lines, and then she says that the white lines were her children, so there are always 3 white lines in the middle of that. And then the bottom lines are the number of grandchildren that were alive when she wove the robe, which means maybe if you look back at her first or second robe, there's no yellow lines on the bottom of her signature. So then you go back and start looking at historic robes and you find that there's this awesome lightning pattern, and then 100 years later, there's another robe with this awesome same lightning pattern. And 100 years later, there's another one. And we're like, so there's no way somebody lived 200 years and wove these robes. But does it mean that there was a weaving teaching lineage of these particular robes? And we have someone in the audience, Becca Smith, who is wearing a pair of earrings, and they're the only collection of earrings that I've released in the world that have my signature on the bottom corner of them. And it is a line of black, a line of white, and a line of green. Or is it green, white, black? It goes green, white, black. Yes? On the very corner bottom.
Yeah, no, the black is at the bottom and the green is right above it.
Is there not a band of white?
I'm not seeing a band of white.
Cool, so the band of white is actually the 2 white lines that go across. So see, even in my own signature, I'm like, see, there's like the double set of whites.
The line above.
But if you look at the robes that I've woven that have gone off to art collectors and museums, my signature goes black, white, green. and the robe that, I'll give you a postcard before you leave, the robe that Ricky Tagaban and I wove together, I signed one corner of it and he signed the other, and mine goes black, white, green, and his goes turquoise, white, black. And we didn't know each other's signatures until we put them on, and we were like, oh, opposite but different, and like so cute. We're like, oh my God, we planned that. Anyway, it's really sweet. So we didn't actually plan it. It was really cute. So yes, signature. It's unreliable, but possible, and it's there. Yes. Thank you. Thank you again.